Redditors, what is the most f***ed up thing you've ever done? Story 1. This was an embarrassing one that I hope no one ever finds out. One night a few years ago, my boyfriend and his family, get Chinese food from our favorite little place. For some reason, this night it doesn't sit well with me. An hour after eating, I get that intensely sick feeling like you have to poop so bad that you want to throw up. Whatever, I go upstairs and destroy the bathroom. It's important to note there are 2 bathrooms upstairs and none downstairs, which is like a little apartment where my boyfriend and I stay. After I'm sure my bowels are empty, I go back down to lay in bed. Thought I could nap it off. Nah. About 30 seconds after laying down, I get the urge to go again. I run upstairs and to my horror, both bathrooms are occupied. His sister is refusing to get out of the shower even though it's an emergency, and his dad is blowing up the other toilet, presumably suffering a similar fate to mine. I begrudgingly go sit in bed and contemplate my options as the bubbling in my gut grows worse. Bust down the bathroom door and traumatize his sister? Make the 30-minute drive home? No, it was urgent. I even thought about shitting my pants, against my will, and dealing with the embarrassment. God, I don't want to subject my future in-laws to that. I begrudgingly realized my only option is to go outside like nature intended. Their yard is very open and it was a super bright moonlit night, so there was no place to do it without feeling super exposed. Except for under the trampoline. My thought process was, no one has used the trampoline for years, and it's out of sight and walking range so no one could accidentally step on it. Great. I do my business, get soaked in the process. It was slightly raining and the trampoline was pouring water on me. Clean up with napkins and wet wipes and come inside. Immediately throw up in the trash can from the shock, embarrassment, anxiety, and probably the sickness. Clean that up and immediately go to bed. Everything was fine for a few days, until my boyfriend's dad lightheartedly tells me how he was late for work that morning. The dog had rolled in some shit and he had to get a bath. I felt like throwing up all over again, but thankfully everyone just suspected it was some type of animal poop. Story 2. Not trying to save a 6-year-old child after they got him out of the pool since we got laws about victim responsibility. If you save a victim from danger, you'll be fully responsible for their well-being, economically even, so you have to pay for their treatment and the family doesn't have to move a finger. They're even entitled to sue you. This is to prevent random people who don't know what they're doing to apply the wrong treatment. Kinda ironic in hindsight. And because I was only given a single class in my life about first aid that did not stick with me on how to do things properly about 7 years before the incident. So even if I tried, it was likely I would screw up and damage the kid. I can't even measure my own strength sometimes and break things very easily. I can't even think what would happen if I lightly tried one of those movements to pump out water from the lungs on a kid. I could break the rib cage by accident. Apparently, the other 30 to 50 people thought the same or not thinking at all, so they all just encircled the kid, moaning and crying but doing nothing. Someone called emergency services, but they arrived around 20 minutes later. The kid was already dead when they arrived. Not gonna lie, this still haunts me a bit today. It makes me feel a little better to unwind about this sometimes. I'm not completely sure if I could have done something without making things even worse. Man. The story is f***ed up, but I think the law is even more f***ed up. Story 3. I cheated on my wife a month after our 3rd son was born. It sucks that I can't take that back. 18 years later and I still don't feel like I can ask for forgiveness. It happened in 2004. I moved out, we went through therapy, we talked about the whys and what to do now. I was over at our house with the kids and was watching the ALCS while we played. She was on the couch. That was the year Boston came back to beat the Yankees, and I think it was Game 7, but I'm not sure. She was never a baseball and television person, but she really followed the Sox that postseason. After the WS was over, I was working in the yard and the kids were playing outside. She came out with a box for me. Inside the box was a Red Sox hat. We live in Atlanta and I'm not a Sox fan. Inside the hat was a note from my wife that said, "I figure if Boston can come back and beat the odds, so can we. I love you." I still have that note in my wallet, as a reminder that the thrill of the chase isn't as thrilling as finishing the race with the person I started it with. Story 4. You know how people bag up their leaves and leave them out by the street? As a teen, we used to go out at night and dump them back out on people's lawns. Thinking about it now, I would be so pissed if someone did that to me. I've got that beat. We used to superglue pennies onto the keyholes of people's mailboxes. Those community-style ones where there's 16 small boxes and a big one. I was riding the bus home from school one day and we saw a guy absolutely smashing the shit out of his mailbox with the tip of a shovel, trying to pry the penny off. Now that I'm an adult, I would probably burn down the planet in my rage if someone did that to me. Story 5. When I was married, my ex-wife and I went to a bar with a couple of friends. There were more her friends than mine. The wife of the couple made it clear she didn't like me and spent the evening taking as many shots at me as possible. As she got drunker, the insults became more frequent and meaner. My attempts to fire back were stopped by her husband and my ex-wife. I was expected to take it but not give it. She went to the restroom and she got off her chair, the leg broke and she face planted. Ex-wife and bitch went to the restroom and husband of bitch went to find the manager. I swapped chairs with the table next to ours and told the manager that the injury, broken nose, wasn't due to a broken chair, but because she was drunk and fell over. Story 6. My grandmother moved in with us when I was a teenager and started to go senile. Our relationship quickly soured. Living with her was different from sending her letters and making phone calls. It wasn't her fault. You change when you start to lose your mind. But honest to goodness, I couldn't stand her. Everything was my fault. Every single thing she misplaced, I stole. I must have stolen it. She couldn't accept that she just couldn't remember where she was putting things. The worst time, she had a meltdown over photos she'd misplaced and had my parents search my room while I shouted that I never touched them. I was a teenager. Why would I want her photos of the garden? I could just go outside if I wanted to see it, for fuck's sake. One night I woke up because she was shouting for me in that nasally trill she always had that I'd grown to hate because of her constant theft accusations. Just my name, over and over. She was in the bathroom across the hall from my room. I didn't know what time it was. I figured it was early because she always got up at like 5 a.m. I figured she was shouting for me because she misplaced something again and was happily accusing me of going into her private bathroom that I never went near and taking it. So I thought some very angry choice words at her and pretended I didn't hear her. She called for me for 30 or more minutes until it finally woke up my mom. I figured, there, now my mom can deal with you and I can sleep. Well, turns out her kidneys had shut down acutely. She was vomiting and excreting blood that whole time, yelling for me. Not to tell me I was a little thief again, but because she needed help. She was 85. That 30 minutes probably didn't make a difference, but she died a few days later, and while I know it wasn't my fault, her extended suffering was. I'm sorry, Grandma. Story 7. Picking up a dude's head that fell off his rotting corpse when I worked at a mortuary transport company is definitely up there. Also picking up a 5-year-old kid who had a bookcase fall on him, feeling all the broken bones moving in his tiny body f***ed me up good. If we're talking behavior, I definitely attempted to ruin friends' relationships in my teenage years, because I was a bitter and lonely ass. Seeing them happy only made me feel worse, so I wanted to drag them down to my level. Luckily, the relationships were stronger than my bullshit in most cases. Edit. I've gotten a few messages asking questions about the mortuary job and whether or not these were the worst calls I've ever had, so I figured I'd post an old comment from a different thread. Trigger warning for witnessed a woman pretty much break over the headless body of her son. Used to work for a mortuary transport service. I mostly picked up from retirement homes and from people's houses where they had a hospice nurse watching over them, but would occasionally get calls from the local coroner's office. One night I was sent out to a call not far from where I lived. The place was surrounded by cops. They lead me and my partner to the bathroom where a guy had blown his head off with a shotgun in the shower. It was a mess, as you can probably imagine, but by this point it wasn't super out of the ordinary for me. I'd pick up before, as well as overdoses, decomps, and kids, so I was pretty much numb to it. We got the guy into a bag and loaded him up on the gurney, and we're out the door at the worst possible time. The dude's mother was outside now, having been called by someone I guess. She started hysterically screaming, which immediately put me on edge. I had dealt with crying and mourning loved ones every day, even when I had to pick up the kid. His parents were already ushered into another room. But blood-curdling screams right in front of me? This was a first. A cop tried to grab her, but she managed to wriggle away from him, running up to the gurney and pretty much collapsing onto it, sobbing uncontrollably and babbling nonsense. It was the rawest and unfiltered emotion I've ever seen. She was clutching onto the gurney and like rocking back and forth to the point that I had to grab the cart before the whole thing toppled over into the front lawn. I stood there for around 5 minutes with a front row seat to unrivaled agony with no way to really hide from it, before a cop stepped in and tried to pull her away, saying that we had to take him. She eventually relented and we got the body loaded into the car, and from there it was business as usual. The reason that one stuck with me so much is because, well, it was almost like looking into my own future. I was at the time, and a shotgun in the shower was exactly how I planned to do it. The only reason I was waiting was because I wanted to be in my own place, so my roommate didn't have to find me. The dude was even around my age. It was a weird feeling, almost like standing over my own body, and when I saw the woman's breakdown, I could only see my own mom. It was at that moment that I decided that my mom would never scream and cry like that because of something I did. While the feelings are definitely still there and I still think about death a lot, that night was when I decided that I would never do it, no matter how much it hurts. What sucks is that it almost made the pain worse. Before I knew I had an out, a way to make this miserable shit end, but after that, I just felt trapped. Don't want to live, but now I can't die. Story 8. I'm gonna rat my little sister out. During our parents' divorce and custody battle, we were forced to sit in on family counseling sessions. I was 12 and she was 8. We thought my mom was acting funny and might have been banging the counselor on the side for her own personal testimonial interests, still not confirmed, so we were pissed off because we loved our mom and our dad. It seemed like the counselor favored our mom over our dad, and it got rough sometimes watching him become outed by only 2 adult forces who didn't love him in the world. Anyway, my little sister and I were left alone in his office, and she decided she was going to take a shit in his little trash can to assert dominance. It was asserted. It never went back. They say that in every generation there's a hero. Story 9. My hometown is generally pretty middle class to poor. There's a bunch of rich people that live in the woods, and one of them had a kid that went to our high school and bullied the out of the kids that weren't as wealthy. That shithead grew up and bought a Camaro last summer and removed the muffler, so it would be the loudest thing in town. On New Year's Eve of 2021, he decided to ruin a town tradition and lap the town common with it during the tree lighting ceremony, while people were caroling and giving thanks. Summer of last year, me and a friend decided it was time to get revenge because nobody wanted to do anything about it. My friend's dad owned a junkyard and they recently got an old train horn from a busted diesel that ended up there. We spent a good week getting it set up in the back of his work truck and decided to wait on it for a little while. A month or so later, we found out he was having a party of some kind with other rich folks and his family. We didn't know what it was about, so we carefully parked outside his house on the opposite end of his fence. Right as it was starting, we blasted the train horn and peeled out before anyone knew what happened. News got out later and we found out the party we bombed was actually a wake for his late grandfather. Honestly, I was expecting the story to be about you trying to rig the train horn to his exhaust pipe. Story 10. Stand in knee-deep sewage to pull grass because it had gone too long in that area apparently, barefoot and barehanded. Thanks, Dad, for sending me to a behavioral modification program in Jamaica that has virtually no child protection laws. Edit. So here's the full story. The program was called the Tranquility Bay and is located on the south coast of Jamaica, which is a dry and harsh climate, unlike the pretty north coast for tourists. This happened in 1997 and my brother and I were both sent there within a year of the program opening. It was the second facility run by cked and JK and cost about $35,000 a year per kid, despite them claiming to be non-profit. The original facility was in American Samoa and called Paradise Cove. I think they had it worse than me because we had some kids transfer from there and apparently molestation by the staff was common at the Samoa location. It didn't happen in Jamaica as far as I know. How did I end up there? Well, my brother was sent first. It wasn't his first program. He had been sent to military academy and things like that during summers for his misbehaving. He acted up in class, smoked cigarettes, etc., but never had any legal trouble. When my dad sent my brother to Jamaica, it was too much for me. It caused a major fight with my father, verbal only, and a falling out. Nothing unusual for a teenager. I was the well-behaved one, never had attention or got in trouble, and pretty much a goody two-shoes. With that known, everyone was surprised when 2 months later, I got sent to the same academy in Jamaica. Here's the process of being sent. So I was in school, 16 years old, and during class, my vice principal asked me to come to speak with him in the hall. I wasn't concerned. I never got in trouble. When I got to the hallway, 4 grown men grabbed and restrained me and walked me out to a car where I saw my dad waiting. At that point, I knew what was up and that I was about to be sent to the program. I didn't say a word to my father as I passed and was driven 8 hours away to an airport to lessen the risk of a run attempt in an area that I knew. I was flown to Utah to a psychiatric care facility where they processed us for international travel. A week later, I was in Jamaica. Now here's what happened when I got there. The program functions as a 6-step program that you can work your way out of to get to go home. They removed every right and liberty we had. We had to request permission to speak, to stand up from our chairs, to pass through a doorway, etc. As you progress through the program and move up through the 6 levels, you gain more privileges. It was a rush though. I never knew of anyone making it to level 6 and getting out. Why would they? That would cause the program to lose money. There were plenty of punishments of varying degrees, as well if you did anything wrong. You may wonder why I didn't refuse to go stand in the sewage and pull grass. Well, a refusal is a serious offense there and sets you back 3 levels. For most students, that would be setting you back all the way to the beginning of the program. I didn't want that. I wanted to graduate and get out, so I complied. How bad was the standard of living? Worse than US jail or prison with the exception of concerns of rape and violence. We did not have hot water, air conditioning, proper medical care, etc. Did I get sick standing in that sewage? You bet your ass I did. Due to the large amount of sand fleas and mosquitoes in the tropical climate, most of us were usually covered in bug bites. Naturally, those bug bites got infected by the sewage, and I got a common illness there that was just called fat foot. The infection would cause your foot and ankle to balloon to double their size. No, this didn't warrant a doctor's visit. They just applied antibiotic cream and hoped we'd get better. Thankfully, it worked. Ringworm and other unnecessary illnesses were also common. The laundry wasn't sanitized properly, again no hot water, and we washed that by hand. Our food also was barely edible. I haven't been in prison, but I've seen TV shows try to show the slop they get fed that looks better than what I had in Jamaica. Where was my mom in all this? fighting to get us back. She had the community behind her and lots of donations, went to the media, etc. It got attention but didn't get us home. My parents were divorced and my dad was remarried to a judge. With his multi-millions and her power, we didn't have a chance in the courts. How it came to an end. After 12 months, I was the highest ranked student in the program as the only level 5 out of a possible 6. My dad let me come home the day before soccer tryouts for varsity, which was big where I live. My brother was able to come home 2 months later. He was a level 4 and that made for a total of 16 months of him being there. Here's another edit to include a response I made to someone else below on asking how this is legal since many people are curious. So what happens a lot is as soon as a facility starts going under investigation, they'll sell it to a family member, and then the process has to start all over again. I know that for one of the programs I went to, a girl, RIP kind soul, hung herself from one of the stalls. That was before my time, but that cabin became our classroom, so it was very eerie having to do your business in that stall knowing that. Following that event was a huge CPS investigation, and I believe it's the event that caused that facility to have to cut numbers in half to satisfy CPS. I believe most of those people were sent to other programs while only a lucky few got to go home. That facility was massive and housed close to or around 1,000 plus students at one point. Another one I went to got shut down by CPS because a kid who had only been there 3 days was jumped in the shower with staplers and had things put up inside him. He was somehow magically able to tell his parents, so they called the police and got the facility shut down. His parents loved him, and I'm glad they believed him and did something about it. But unfortunately, the majority of us got shipped off to other programs. They manipulated our parents and said we were shutting down due to some other BS. Our phone calls were monitored, and they'd always tell our parents that we will manipulate them and say anything to go home. So our parents took their word as the gospel. Your freedoms were hinged on how you behaved, so if you squealed to your folks, you'd lose privileges. The difference was 3 hots in the cot, or squeal and you get to sleep on the floor. No blankets and stuck eating PB&J sandwiches, and maybe a cold cut sandwich with meat if you got lucky. Do you like outside time and playing football? Well, you guys can't because Johnny or Lucy or anyone brave told their parents that we didn't feed them or shut off the hot water in the winter on them. Do you want outside time back? Then you know what to do. So we'd throw what's called a blanket party. Throw a blanket over someone so they can't fight back and jump and beat them. And beat on someone so we could have TV time or outside time back. I'm ashamed that I once beat a kid with a soap bar and a sock because he stole snacks sent from home from me. That wasn't even the worst part. Others caught wind of it and he got a blanket party thrown, but they put a belt around him on top of the blanket so he couldn't get away. They shaved his eyebrows off along with his head, and when he was writing his apology letter, they proofread it and rejected it. They made him tear it up, eat the apology letter, and start over and over again until they got bored. The kid was bawling, and it haunts me whenever I recall it. I am so sorry that happened, man, and swear that I'm a changed man. I did it because it was the first personal package that I was allowed to have after reaching level 3, and it took a lot to even get there. 6 months of intense brainwashing and the first personal thing I got sent from home was stolen, so I felt cheated. It was guerrilla tactics. They got away with a lot because it wasn't always staff that had to fix a problem. Take away basic human rights and you'll be shocked at the shameful things someone would do to another human being. The kicker is the more you snitched on others, the further along in your program you were and the closer you were to going home. So it behooved others to throw people under the bus. Theft from the kitchen and shared with your bunkmates was normal, until they did inventory and decided to flip the cabins and search. At that point, it was every person for themselves. Guess what? Whoever snitches and saves us time will get extra privileges and any combo you want from McDonald's, as well as get to chill and eat snacks and drink soda in the air-conditioned staff office. Some people in real life think we made this shit up, so a lot of folks don't even bother sharing. However, you get a group of program kids together and it's like writing the playbook for Gitmo. The Museum of Human Rights would have a field day with some of the stuff that goes on. I'm not downplaying other atrocious acts of humanity, but these programs really are that It follows you for the rest of your life. May life be kind to those who are not strong enough to change what they could change. We often recited the Serenity Prayer and it became very cult-like, but it has, honest to God, helped me cope with life. Story 11. The day before I stopped drinking alcohol altogether, I was in a really dark place for a number of reasons. I was absolutely using alcohol as a crutch. One of the reasons why I was in a such bad place emotionally was because my cousin was in decline due to glioblastoma. I was actively seeing this person, whom I loved dearly, lose his sense of self and ability to understand conversations and situations. He was young, just turned 50. There was a lot of light in the beginning, but considering that glioblastoma is effectively a stageless brain cancer, it was almost guaranteed he would lose the battle. The day that I stopped drinking altogether was the day that I was supposed to drive him to a research institute for his monthly treatment and check in. It was the only time I was asked to take on that level of responsibility, as his wife would normally take him. I helped in a bunch of different ways, like hanging out with him and when he'd otherwise be alone, but this appointment was pretty big. I depressedly drank myself into a stupor the night before and missed our meetup time. I'd said that I'd be there no matter what, and it wasn't. The appointment happened, and he reassured me everything was okay as he knew the battle was over anyway. But I will never forgive myself for that. Even typing this out makes me feel like the biggest piece of shit. I wish I were sober then. Story 12. I'm a recovered heroin addict, 9 years sober, and have a lot of stories of how much of a shit person I used to be. I really can't gauge what my worst moment would be, but I can post a story or two definitely. One day I was flat broke and on my last bag of my neighborhood pharmacist just recently was arrested for a DUI. Brainstorming, I came up with an idea to try and get some pills at the ER. I still had med insurance at the moment, so I thought this was my best option. My buddy came by and we were hanging out outside smoking a cigarette and trying to figure out how to get hurt. Just enough to get some pills, but not enough to actually have permanent repercussions. There was this big cinder block beside my garage, and I decided to drop it on my foot in hopes of just breaking a toe at most. I stood outside on the concrete patio for about 5 minutes with a cinder block trying to hype myself up enough to drop it on my foot. I couldn't do it. Psyched myself out too much. I told my friend that he would have to do it for me, and he said okay. He held it above waist high and dropped it on my foot. I knew it wasn't enough damage, so I told him that he needed to put it up higher and drop it again, to which he did. So go to the hospital, tell them that I was carrying boxes downstairs to the basement, and drop them when I slipped on the bottom step. So I go back, get x-rays, and I'm in the waiting room. Doctor comes in and tells me that I've torn numerous ligaments in my foot and probably would hurt less if I had just broken my foot. Hearing this, I was excited thinking, yes, I just scored. I didn't care about the pain at the moment, just happy that I just potentially scored. They released me and had me a script. They wrote me a script for ibuprofen 800 milligrams. Defeat. Story 13. My grandpa retired early due to disability and watched me during the day all summer until I was 11 to 12 and could chill alone after school. He spoiled the shit out of me. Took me to amusement parks, brought me to toy stores, all sorts of stuff. My parents told him to dial it back because I was being an entitled shit to them when I was 6 to 7. After this happened, I told my grandpa I wanted to go to the amusement park one day. He told me that my parents said no, but maybe we could go next week or the week after. I got incredibly upset. Being the manipulative sociopath I was, I put in the waterworks. He just said he was sorry and that he didn't want to upset my parents. So I looked at him and said, "You just don't love me anymore, do you?" He got really sad after I said that and told me that he loved me very much, but we couldn't go. So I just kept going. "Why don't you love me?" Every time I said it, he got more and more distraught. Then he started to cry. I made my 56-year-old grandfather cry, the sweetest man I've ever known. The image of him crying while saying, "Please don't say things like that," is so deeply seared in my mind. I think it was one of the most important moments of my childhood, as far as my emotional development. At that time, I couldn't process it immediately. I didn't even apologize. I just went to my room. I didn't even tell my parents what happened. My mom said that around that time, it seemed like I matured a decade. I was quiet, polite, and incredibly well-behaved. I treated my grandpa much nicer from that point forward. I couldn't bring myself to apologize for it until in my late teens when he was dying of cancer and I found out that he wasn't even blood-related to me. He was my mom's stepdad. Just one of the best people humanity could offer, and I owe so much of who I've become to him. Edit. Some people are asking about what he said when I apologized. I mentioned it in a couple of comments, but he didn't remember what I was talking about when I brought it up. He wasn't the type of person to hold on to something like that. He just laughed and told me that I shouldn't have dwelled on it for so long. Story 14. Did at work. I was a teacher. I had a toddler, I was teaching 212 high school kids, going through the last 2 classes for master's program, and my dad was dying of cancer. My husband was working a ton at a new job, and I just didn't have it in me to do it all. Snorting Adderall saved my life. I would crush 4 pills throughout the day and snort every couple of hours. It gave me an energy boost, and I was able to focus on what needed doing. At night, I would take a sleeping pill and then do it all over again the next day. Edit. This was 15 to 16 years ago, and I only did it for 1 school year. The reason I didn't take them orally is because I didn't get the rush of energy that allowed me to complete everything I needed to do. Thank you for those of you saying that it wasn't a big deal. I'm still embarrassed I did it. I would probably have been in huge trouble if I would have been caught, but at the time I was so drained from everything I did what felt would be helpful. Story 15. This is a story of revenge. I've never told it before. It's f***ed up, but I still think I was justified. Many years ago I lived in Japan, where the English school business is a big business. A good friend of mine had put years of work into developing his own curriculum. I was his head teacher and helped develop several original educational textbooks for kids. It was ready to launch his school. but he needed financial backing because trying to incorporate in Japan as a foreigner is close to impossible. He found a local businessman to help finance the operation. My friend put down $50,000 and the local businessman put down $51,000, giving him a controlling share. I'm not sure exactly what happened. All I know is that the local businessman basically pulled out the last minute and stole the $50,000 from my friend, and there was nothing my friend could do. This local businessman then decided to open up the school entirely on his own and cut my friend out using the material I had designed. This local businessman had never met me and didn't know that I existed, so my friend suggested that I reply to his advertisement in the newspaper, looking for a head teacher and try to get hired so we could bring the school down from the inside. I did. I was hired as the head teacher and was put in charge of setting up all the classrooms, getting all the supplementary books, all of the toys, games, setting up the class schedules, and even setting up all the computers and software needed to run the business. Literally everything. I spent 3 months preparing to launch the school, building the curriculum, printing flyers, talking to parents of the kids, and signing them up for classes, the whole 9 yards. But 2 days before the school was set to open, I got my revenge. I threw all the computers into the garbage bin, which was collected the next day, and changed all the passwords for all the cloud services. I then threw out my cell phone and disappeared. Because this guy was sketchy, he had always wanted to pay me in cash. So he didn't have my bank information, didn't have my actual mailing address, and I gave him a fake one to start. So when I disappeared, he literally had no way to know who I was or how to find me. I found out through the grapevine later that this wound up costing that local businessman several $100,000, as he needed to pull cash from his other businesses to refinance this one and basically start from scratch. He missed the beginning of the school year and all the parents that he had contracted with were pissed and canceled, and he was never able to recoup them as clients. Basically, it cost him an entire year. I don't regret it for a second, because this guy stole $50,000 from my friend and basically took advantage of some young entrepreneurs who were just trying to get their business started. He got what he deserved. And now I have a backstory as a corporate saboteur. Story 16. I flew to Morocco for vacation a couple of years ago, and one day due to acclimatization issues while in the swimming pool, I realized that in an extremely near future I'm gonna have explosive diarrhea. I ran to my hotel room and almost made it to my room, but not quite. Long story short, since there was nobody in the hotel floor because it was lunchtime, and I knew from the deep of my heart that I wouldn't make it to my room, I unleashed a load of my liquid chocolate thunder into a huge flower pot that was on the floor. Some poor hotel maid was definitely forced to clean that out, and I couldn't even tip her. Story 17. I took a shit in my sister's cat's litter box when I was 13. Story. My sister is a piece of shit. She's 5 years older than me and has always been a bigger girl. She was the golden child and got everything she wanted. I'm quiet and keep to myself a lot. She would take my panties and have her period in them, and then give them back to me stained, just to give you an idea of how shitty she was. I would complain to my parents, but they would just brush me off, give her a slap on the wrist, and ignore it otherwise. She kept taking my stuff, breaking it on purpose and stretching out my clothes. I had finally had enough, but I didn't really know what to do to get back at her. She had this cat. She loved this cat so damn much and took really good care of it. One day she was scooping the litter box and I was asking her to give me my stuff back. She just ignored me like usual. I was furious. Got that seeing red, do dumb shit in the moment mad. I don't know if my bowels were in agreement or if the planets had aligned just right, but as soon as she left the room, I looked down at that box and thought to myself, I'm going to make her clean my shit. I proceeded to have the biggest little kid shit in that box. One of those ones that looked like a 300-pound biker named Jim laid it. It was obviously not cat poop. I was freaked out when I saw it. Thought I'd do a little poo, pass it off as the cat, and get my giggles knowing she scooped it. I refused to go back down this time. My sister was going to scoop that shit. I waited days for the shoe to finally drop. Nothing. No word was said. No terrified scream from the laundry room. No vet visit for a cat's ruptured butthole. I guess she scooped the poop. She didn't stop terrorizing me until she moved out 5 years later. But every time she did, I would always remember she scooped that poop and it made it a little bit more bearable. Story 18. My buddy and I were around 8, and we were being watched by a neighbor. We somehow got our hands on several boxes of matchbooks, so we started building rockets out of aluminum foil filled with match heads. When we didn't have enough to build any more rockets, we each took the last few packs of matches and started flinging them at each other. You know, ripping off the match head and then firing it off the striker on the matchbook cover. We were chasing each other around the yard and got near another neighbor's house. They had one of those roll-up wooden reed sunscreens, the ones they now make out of plastic. The match got wedged between the reeds and started burning. Before we knew it, it was 1 inch round, 3 inches around, 6 inches around, and it wouldn't go out. Pretty soon the screen was burning from the bottom up, and soon the house... We ran and got a garden hose and somehow managed to extinguish it with only half the screen burned. We then went back in the house where we were supposed to be being watched and turned on the TV, until the fire department showed up. Being 8, we tried to deny it until they pointed out our wet pant legs and the ashes still on our shoes. I'll be asked, so we got out of it. The neighbor did not press charges, but my dad paid for the repairs and pressed my ass with a belt, as it was back in the day. I don't back judge him in 2023. I have to admit that the punishment and the fact that we could have burned somebody's house down sharpened my sense of what was right and wrong, and that my actions could have an impact on other people. Story 19. I don't know if it's that f***ed up, but it's something that follows me around and that I regret deeply. When I was in my late teens, I worked for a care company that went into people's homes to support them, mostly the elderly. I met a lot of sweet, interesting, and sometimes pretty mean people, but my favorite was Joyce. I was a pretty f***ed up kid with a crap home life, and Joyce was well into her 80s, but I don't know, we just clicked. She was a genuinely cool person to spend time with, a friend. I'd start to go around to hers in my breaks rather than just sit in my car, and her voice would light up through the buzzer when she knew it was me. I'd make her sandwiches and cup of tea, and we'd smoke cheap cigarettes, and she'd tell me stories about her late husband building their home. Now she was a dressmaker who made dresses on the side for trans women or men who just wanted to wear dresses because, in her words, who cares if you're not hurting anyone? She was awesome. She was often my last visit of the night, so I'd just clock off when done and stay late to do her hair. Joyce had daughters who lived close by but rarely visited. I remember her saying it was nice of them to drop off some Christmas dinner in Tupperware one time so that it could be heated up in the microwave. My only thought was, why wasn't she sat at your table? There was also another carer I'd never met but who she spoke highly of. It broke her heart when she found out he'd been stealing from her. Joyce would ask me that if I was ever to quit the job that I would tell her first. I wouldn't just leave her. I'd say of course, and if I do, I'll come and see you anyway. But I never did. I never saw her again. One night into a work shift, something happened and I was rushed to the hospital and had to abandon my shift. I managed to notify work in time, but I was in the hospital for a while, then unable to work for months. Never saw Joyce again, and in her eyes I abandoned her. And I guess I did, in a way. I thought about her lots and about going up to visit, but there was always something. I was recovering and my boyfriend was a Then eventually, will she recognize me? It'll be weird now, it's been too long. What if she's passed? That was 12 years ago and it still gnaws at me from time to time. I saw a lot of super upsetting things and spent time with a lot of forgotten people. Call your grandparents, your parents if you can. Story 20. When I was a junior in college, I lived in a house with some of my sorority sisters. One of them was dating my boyfriend's, now my husband, roommate. The four of us were inseparable for about a year and a half. The other couple had a very volatile on and off relationship, and sometimes it got physical apparently. One night after we had all been to a party, my friend came to my door and said to me she had just been arrested for assault. The story she then told me was that her BF was beating her up and strangling her. She punched him in self-defense and gave him a black eye. They were outside of his frat house, so I guess someone saw them and called the cops. She didn't have visible injuries, so they only arrested her. In the coming months, I supported her 1,000,000%, came to every court date, spoke as a character witness, and cut off all my friends in my boyfriend's fraternity because they sided with him. My now husband lost a lot of friends, as did I. His brothers vandalized our house, I helped her file reports with the college. It was a huge thing. The following semester, they got back together. I was livid. After everything I did to support her, it felt like a slap in the face. She was very mad that I was mad, and basically said she made up the abuse to get him in trouble. Months later, she ripped out a bunch of his hair and got arrested again, so I think the abuse was actually going the opposite way. After all I went through for her lies, I was crushed. All her sorority sisters took her side and said I was being unreasonable. I was depressed and missed a lot of classes. She and my housemates got into coke and were selling from my house. I was trying to be a teacher, so I was very freaked out this was going to permanently fuck up my life. I worked on getting new housing, but it took a while. One day I was home alone and saw her iPad, which she had won at a fundraising event at school. I don't know what came over me, but I took it and then I sold it on eBay for $300. She never found out. I never told anyone until now. I just felt like in some way I was getting myself some justice for what happened. Anyways, thank you if anyone read this. I've been wanting to let it out for quite some time.